Hi, this is our Save Ralph video analysis by Alexa Fornby, Camille Couch, Xavier Contreras, Matthew Love, and Keegan Curlin.
Save Ralph is a short animated mockumentary. This emotional 4-minute film stars Ralph, a rabbit being interviewed for a documentary about his life as a lab tester for cosmetic products. Ralph describes his job with unsettling calmness, detailing the damage done to his body in the name for human safety. He mentions being blind in one eye, deaf in one ear, and having suffered from several chemical burns on his back. Despite all of this pain, Ralph says he's doing it for the humans, suggesting that if his suffering seems to help people feel better about using things like shampoo or lipstick, then maybe it's worth it, even though it clearly isn't. The tone of the film is darkly satirical, using Ralph's polite and passive demeanor to expose the normalized cruelty behind animal testing. As it continues, Ralph is subjected to yet another test, this time leaving him completely blind and the only eye he had left. And then other rabbits are seen begging the camera crew for help, revealing how common and desperate this suffering truly is. In its closing moment, Ralph faces the camera, covered in bandages, saying, "It's all good," while holding up a weak thumbs up.
Videos and images can reassure the audience, or in this case of the video, unsettle us. This is a prime example of invoking feelings of guilt towards the cosmetic industry. At the start of the video, we see Ralph the rabbit. The creators designed him with humanistic features such as having fingers, wearing clothes, standing on his hind legs, and living in a nice and comfy house, and doing actions that are humanistic and formal, such as eating cereal with a spoon to make the character more relatable to the audience. On top of this, Ralph talks about his job and how he gets permanent injuries such as being blind and deaf. When we see the hand that takes him to work, people see that even though he may be sophisticated in his ways, he has no true free will. Once at work, the scenery is completely different. We enter a laboratory where everything is all white and gray, bright and uncomfortable for anyone to be in. We see Ralph set in a cage with other rabbits around him pleading to be let out. Once the rabbits are pleading to escape are out of the camera frame, Ralph brushes it off and he accepts his fate. And instantly, right after he's injected with cosmetics into the eye, he's howling in pain, which made me image as if it happened to me. In the final scene, we see a locker room and Ralph is walking out, grunting in pain as if he just clocked out of his 9-to-5 job. He turns away from the camera thinking he is talking to it. But when he finally faces the audience, we see that he's been blinded in both eyes and he has been experimented on all over his body. He brushed it off of his shoulder as if it was just another day of the week, yet his eyes were looking around as if Ralph knew he was lying to us and himself. At the end of it, the audience may feel emotionally scarred after now knowing what happened in these laboratories. For some people, they might feel guilty knowing that they bought products from companies that may have done these experiments. After watching this video, everyone will remember how Ralph became an icon.
Next up is the role of sound in Save Ralph, and it plays a super important role in its overall persuasiveness. For instance, in the scene where Ralph and his friends are about to be tested on, we see the elements of screaming and despair, which first was them being excited and thinking that help was on the way when the documentary crew came in. But it turns out that that was not the case, and so the viewers are led to think that maybe help was on the way when it turns out that they were ended up just being tested on. In another scene where Ralph is brushing his teeth, you can hear the sound of the toothbrush very vividly, and it's every sound of the toothbrush moving is associated with pain, as he even says that he hurts when he just moves around or he walks. Similarly enough, in the last scene, we see the aftermath of Ralph and the testing on his body, where he uses sarcasm to show that everything we have in our bathrooms, like shampoo and eyeliner, were used on animals like him. And he even says that he would be, quote unquote, out of a job if it wasn't for us. And so it's this sort of guilt that the video is using, that even though Ralph might think, oh wow, like this is my life's calling, but the real message of the video is in these sounds and in his words that show that animals have feelings too.
So now we're gonna move on to the visual elements analysis of the video Save Ralph. So the first couple ones is the stop motion animation style. What falls under that is the handcrafted realism and the inconsistency throughout the video. So the handcrafted realism gives kind of a sense of like a tactical, intimate feel with all the like handmade puppets and sets. The visual textures like his fur, the clothing, the laboratory surfaces really put an emphasis on the physical like suffering that Ralph is going through. The inconsistency consists of like how like throughout the video you can see different elements and different like backgrounds, different points of where he's injured, which really give a more like jarring and impactful message. Next is the character design, so the physical injuries and the facial expressions on Ralph. So the visual injuries on Ralph, like his missing eye, the bandages, the burn marks, and other signs of abuse. These visual cues kind of like highlight the cruelty without relaying such a graphic violence or violent image. The facial expressions, like despite his injuries, Ralph's facial expressions remain kind of polite and like composed, which kind of creates a sense of like powerful emotion contradiction. He is the victim at the end of the day who's been conditioned to accept his ultimate fate of being tested on. Now moving on to the background, which under that is the laboratory and the apartment. So as you can see, the laboratory is like kind of the setting which is like colorless, oppressive, with harsh lighting and a lot of like metallic tones throughout. This kind of reinforces the cold and clinical nature of like animal testing. We also see the apartment, or like where he has his interviews. The film mimics a documentary interview setup kind of style, which it has Ralph seated and speaking directly to the camera. This kind of adds to like the realism and like the intimacy of the video. You can also see kind of like the glimpses of like the sun throughout like his like different interviews, which kind of shows like the freedom that he could have if it wasn't for all the testing. Now moving on to the coloring and lighting. So a lot of the colors are grays, browns, and washed out colors, which kind of dominate the lab scenes, underscoring the bleakness of Ralph's existence. Moreover, the lighting is like a high contrast lighting. You can see it heavily especially in the laboratory with like the big beam lights above them. That kind of is used to show like shadows and put a lot of emphasis on his injuries. You can see him throughout the video, like his eyes, his neck, his scars. So the use of direct lighting kind of reinforces that sense of like exposure. Now the last thing would be the symbolism. The symbolism is like the Ralph, the injuries, and the blindness. So along with that, Ralph is kind of a rabbit, which is polite demeanor. He's kind of ultimately accepting his fate of violenceness and being tested as lab animals. The injuries kind of show that his entire body is kind of the visual narrative of abuse. Not just like his specific injuries, but like his entire body. And then lastly, the blindness. This kind of symbolizes not his own blindness, but the blindness of like the human society, that we kind of ignore these practices and don't really put an emphasis on eliminating animal testing.
So I'll discuss how Save Ralph is an effective PSA. So this PSA uses a wide range of persuasive techniques. Save Ralph has a strong appeal to pathos, using an anthropomorphic rabbit to convey the message in a similar animation style to the stop-motion films we grew up with, like Wallace and Gromit or the Rankin Bass movies. It's also an appeal to nostalgia, evoking powerful emotions in the viewer. The seemingly wholesome animated formatting of the short film makes it stand out from other PSAs, particularly in the realm of animal activism. The familiar cast and crew lend themselves to the appeal to ethos in this PSA, featuring familiar names like Taika Waititi, Zac Efron, and even George Lopez. This PSA is especially powerful because it creates a jarring contrast between the lighthearted animated interview with the endearing rabbit Ralph and the grim reality of animal testing that defines his job. This juxtaposition stirs strong emotions, blending empathy for Ralph with a sense of guilt for supporting cosmetics tested on animals. As the video closes, a mutilated Ralph weakly gives a thumbs up and assures viewers that it's just part of the job, which subtly highlights how normalized animal cruelty has become in our society. The emotional impact culminates in a clear call to action. No animal should suffer and die in the name of beauty. Help Humane Society International to ban cosmetic testing on animals globally. Viewers are then directed to a website where they can sign a petition and learn more. This final message not only reinforces the emotional weight of the PSA, but also empowers the audience with a tangible way to contribute to meaningful change. And that's our presentation. Thank you.